Greetings. Welcome to the Evidence and Reasons for the Christian Faith video channel. I'm Salvador Cordova, and I'm joined here by Anthony. And we're going to just try to talk about we're going to rehearse some learning modules as I'm putting together a college level creation and intelligent design college level course. And since there's only very few attempts at building a college level course, so the level of excellence has to be pretty high, where professors around universities will say what you said is technically correct. They may disagree with the fundamental claim of intelligent design, but as far as basic chemistry and physics, I want to get that absolutely correct. And if they don't like the implications, it's like, okay, they don't have to like it. They don't even have to agree, but 99% of what we're going to say is going to be basic chemistry, physics, and textbook biology. So Anthony, if you have any words before we get going.
I don't really have too much to say. I'm just here I'm anxious to learn and see what's in the modules.
So as we were talking about how to build a module, I said, well, just tell me about some of the people that, who are friends or associates, and what are their interest levels. And he has friends that are into cars, and as I'm repairing a car, I kind of know, that's a nice machine, and cars have motors and engines and all sorts of things and gears. I could do that. Anthony actually has been giving me good advice on cars, so I said, well, we'll take that angle of machines. And I couldn't quite fit anything about video games in there. Anthony, it just occurred to me there's something I wanted to bring up about. Well, why don't you talk about? Oh yeah, I'll talk a little bit about video games, but feel free to just weigh in about video games a little bit.
So I think the thing we were talking about before was we had contrasted the fact of at macro scales you can have a little more margin of error with stuff because you have more molecules and more atoms to work with. You can either add them or take them away. But when you get down into molecular biological functions, you're working at the molecular and atomic level. And, while there's technically constituent parts to both of those, that's at such a small scale that taking anything away or adding anything to it is going to monumentally change the structure and function of things like proteins and what have you. And the reason that sort of what I ended up likening that to in a video game is if you play something like an 8-bit or 16-bit video game, the various things you're seeing on the screen are composed of pixels on there. And those pixels, especially the lower resolution you get, that would be much more like, getting farther and farther down into the molecular biological level. Once you're making a sprite, which is like your little character out of an 8-bit amount of pixels, taking away one pixel or adding one pixel is a monumental change to that. And it's somewhat indivisible. Not that molecules and atoms are technically indivisible, but but when it comes to how you actually build those things at that level of biology, they might as well be.
Okay, so that gave me a chance we'll file what you said away. I wanted to talk because guys love video games, and it's really funny. There's a question. It's like, does sound like video games? And it's like, I absolutely love them. I used to be, as many of you all know, I used to be in the aerospace and defense industry. And actually going through college, my parents were kind of upset that I seemed to love video games way more than my studies. So I ended up after I graduated college, I had an interview scheduled, and I remember I had 13 job interviews, and I was like, I'd been through 12, and I had kind of some little hints that they might like me, but just nothing I was excited about. And I was getting a little discouraged. I said, God, I mean, a job's kind of nice. It'll pay the bills, but I really want to do something I love. Well, I went into the 13th interview and I walked in that place. I said, do these guys work? They all have video games on their tables. Now, this is 1989. Okay, this is a while back. And I'm like, why, this is a defense contractor. Why do they have video games all over the place? I mean, shouldn't they be working? And then so as I interviewed, they're asking me about, what are your software skills, what languages. They gave me a little exam where I had to show my trigonometry skills. And even before I finished the exam, they said that, the head boss wants to talk to you. And I got offered a job on the spot. And they said, okay, this is what we do. We train pilots on how, we train them up for combat missions. And so we build small scale flight simulators that are desktop size, and then some that are bigger. You'd need a lot. It's not a full blown flight simulator where you have a huge building. You would have like a small cockpit where it had a lot of the the gizmos, and some of those ended up on aircraft carriers. And he said, that's what we do here. And I was like, oh, we make video games. And I remember people were wondering when I put on my resume all my qualifications, what I did, and was like, I was so impressed. I said, I'm going to take a risk. And I had no idea what this company was about. I was just interviewing them. I didn't know anything about interviewing. Had I known better, I would have tailored my resume for the interview. But anyway, I listed at the end for hobbies. I said, I love video games. That was the best thing I could put on my resume. They hired me on the spot. They said he has all the software skills. He has a little experience with computers, and he loves video games. He's our man. That was the best job I ever had. I was playing on these high-end computers where we'd simulate combat missions and training pilots to execute those missions. That was the funnest thing in my life. That was the best job I ever had in my life as far as just sheer fun. So I was sharing an anecdote with Anthony the other night, and I said, one day we were getting ready to ship off a product, and they needed testers, people to test the flight simulators. And it was a Friday night, and I volunteered. And so, I mean, it was like Friday afternoon, I volunteered to test. They said, we got to get this out by Monday. And I was testing that thing. I started Friday afternoon. It was Saturday, like 4 or 5 a.m. And I was still testing, but I really wasn't testing. I was flying missions. I was flying simulated missions to Iraq where I'd be flying an A6 Intruder, which was the airplane we were supporting. And we had the standoff land attack missile. So I'd set this up like a real air crew. And I was both the pilot and bombardier navigator. And I would launch the missile toward the airport in Tehran. And it's just interesting, there's a lot of, we recently had a military action in Tehran. It's like, so you got to, I know these guys are rehearsing it electronically. And I was flying. So the standoff land attack missile has a camera in it. And so what you do is you fly your airplane close enough, you launch your missile. And as soon as you launch it, you turn around and just try to run away as fast as you can, so you won't be attacked, or you lessen the chances you're going to get shot down. And as you're flying away, the missile's sending you video camera image, and you're just flying that missile like a kamikaze. And it turned out that that was used to knock out. So that was like, 1990 or so. 1991, the Gulf War. It wasn't Iran, but it was Iraq. A bombardier, an A6 crew that we were working with, had actually launched the standoff land attack missile, and they successfully guided it into a unfinished nuclear reactor and just wiped it out with two standoff land attack missiles. And I remember watching on the evening news, and I recognized the way the video looked. I said, that's one of our missiles. And what ended up happening, I mean, war is kind of a horrible thing, but on some level, we were just all like these young guys, just cheering as if we were in a baseball game. The hallways, we were high-fiving people. So that's just a little bit. The only thing I could say, this has nothing to do with anything we're going to do today. But since people are curious if I ever loved video games, that's like, I absolutely love them. That was my favorite job. And I'm glad that, I do feel that it led to the greater good that Saddam Hussein was taken down. Even the Iraqi people are very, very grateful that the Americans took him down. I mean, I'm sorry that any lives were lost on either side, but I think this is one time that I felt like, man, something I did. And I could go to my parents and say, see, aren't you glad your son just was playing video games through half his college life? And we've actually heard there was a famous astronaut, and he had kids, and he was having the same issue with his kids, that they love playing video games. Well, and that was Charles Duke. He was a fighter pilot, became an astronaut, landed on the moon. And he had all these kids that were playing video games. Turned out his kids eventually became pilots as well. And they said, they told my sons, man, you just have the fastest reflexes. And they have found that video games have made some of the best pilots ever, because they're just so good with all the instruments and dealing with all the switches and buttons. So it's like, okay, so Mom and Dad, thank you for paying for, back then we had to pay for video games in the arcade. So I got, half my college career wasn't wasted after all. If you have any reflections, then we'll get to business. But I just had to say that because you have friends that are interested in video games.
Not any reflections to really add anything. I mean, that's a very good summary, and that answers their questions pretty poignantly.
Well, thank you. Okay, so we'll get to business. So what ended up happening, I eventually, got moved up as a senior engineer and then scientist, both in a variety of places. Because I was a contractor also, I got to work in all sorts of jobs, like at the Army Night Vision Labs. I eventually worked for Massachusetts Institute of Technology, Research and Engineering. And the joke is, MITRE is the acronym, but they say it's actually Massachusetts Institute of Technology Rejected Engineers. That's the joke in the company. And so they sent me off to flight school to know my job better. And that's how you see me there in my flight suit. I was flying an aerobatic Marchetti fighter. I was still a civilian. That's me. I played piano at one wedding, and then I flew that night. So that's why I'm in the tuxedo. And that was me when I was like age 20 or 19. So that's just a little bit of background, but we'll get to what we were talking about. So what we're talking about is to talk about intelligent design, creation, evolution. And because I'm now starting to work on cars, I'm not that much of a gearhead, but I'm going to have to be working with gears. This is from gears inside a transmission, and I might have to be replacing a, what do they call it? A CV axle, continuous velocity axle in the steering this Saturday with a rocket scientist friend. Have you ever worked on a transmission, Anthony?
No, I have not. They've always been a big pain in the butt. I've seen what has to be done. Pretty sure I've watched my two gearhead friends mess with them before. I'm not a fan. I'll probably have to do it at some point. At least automatic transmissions. Now, I have lended a helping hand to one of my buddies, I think, when he was messing with one of his cars that had a manual transmission. He was having to fix something on that. And that was much easier. It's a much simpler process.
Wow. I mean, I would love to be able to, learn how to do stuff like repairing transmissions. There's just not enough hours in the day. But let me just switch. So we have this. This is a clock. And if you could talk a little bit about gears, I just remembered what I wanted to get. I wanted to get something. I wanted to talk about something related to watches, obviously Paley's watch, and it just occurred to me. Apologies to the audience. If you wanted to help fill in while I try to desperately grab what I wanted to show.
You want me to talk about gears? I love them and I hate them. Like, they're so cool because, the ability to transmit mechanical energy and also get leverages and such out of it, change speeds and change torque, all with that, just with basically a rotational input on one end and however you want to transition to the other. And I love it. I'm always trying to make home projects that require gears. And, I could go out and buy gears. This is why I hate them, because as simple as they are, they're essentially a wheel with spokes on them, very specialized spokes, but spokes nonetheless. Maybe spokes ain't the right word, but I mean, teeth are what they're actually called on a gear. But I go to try to make my own and they work, but they do not work well because especially when I'm making smaller ones, I'm essentially just using some files and an angle grinder to make them. And the smaller you got to make them, the tighter those little tolerances get for how the teeth got to be made and shaped. Otherwise, they want to bind or they don't transmit the power very smoothly. And so that's why I love them and hate them. You just have to talk about gears. That's what immediately came to my mind. I'm like, I got a little gear rant for you.
Well, I found what I needed to get. I don't know if you can read this. So there was I'm sorry, let me bring this up. There was a philosopher named David Hume. And I got this. You can get this on Wikipedia. And so David Hume wrote a treatise on dialogues concerning natural religion. And this was even before William Paley. We'll talk about Paley. Let me see if I can make this bigger so everyone can see it. And if you could be so kind as to, I hope I didn't lose this. See, this is what I hate about these browsers is when I expand it, I ended up losing my place. But can you see this where it says look around the world?
Yeah, I can see it.
All right. If you could read it for our audience, that would be great.
Sure thing. Look around the world. Contemplate the whole and every part of it. You will find it to be nothing but one great machine, subdivided into an infinite number of lesser machines, which again admit the subdivisions to a degree beyond what human senses and faculties can trace and explain. All these various machines and even their most minute parts are adjusted to each other with an accuracy which ravishes into an admiration all men who have ever contemplated. Contemplated them. That's an odd way to put that. The curious adapting of means to ends. The curious adapting of means to ends throughout all nature resembles exactly, though it much exceeds, the productions of human contrivance, of human design through thought, wisdom, and intelligence. Since therefore the effects resemble each other, we are led to infer by all rules of analogy that the causes also resemble, and that the author of nature is somehow similar to the mind of man, though possessed of much larger faculties. Proportion to the grandeur, though possessed of much larger faculties, proportion to the grandeur of the work which he has executed. By this argument, a posterior. Yeah. I can't really see that one. Okay. Posterior, and by this argument alone, we prove at once the existence of a deity and his similarity to a human mind and intelligence. Sorry, I sort of lost my flow there at the end. I don't know what happened.
I can read it again. for the readers, since I've read it so many times, and then we can comment on it, because doesn't that sound like the intelligent design argument of today on
Yeah,
many
and
levels?
you said this was Hume, right?
Yes, which is ironic because Hume actually rejected everything he just said. What he was doing is what we call steel manning the other side. He was trying to represent as accurately what the intelligent design proponents of that day, whatever you want to call them, okay, he was representing as best as he could what their argument was. And I was like, well, that sounds actually pretty good. Why would you want to argue against it? And so this, people have said intelligent design is just something that was concocted to get creationism into public schools. I'm like, well, there may be an element where that was true for some people, but this has existed for a long time. So I'm going to just read it again. Look around the world, contemplate the whole and every part of it. You will find it to be nothing but one great machine, subdivided into an infinite number of lesser machines, which again admit of subdivisions to a degree beyond what human senses and faculties can trace and explain. All these various machines, and even their most minute parts, are adjusted to each other with an accuracy which ravishes into admiration all men who have ever contemplated them. The curious adapting of means to ends throughout all nature resembles exactly, though it much exceeds, the productions of human contrivance, of human design, thought, wisdom, and intelligence. Since therefore the effects resemble each other, we are led to infer by all the rules of analogy that the causes also resemble, and that the author of nature is somewhat similar to the mind of man, though possessed of much larger faculties proportioned to the grandeur of the work which he has executed. By this argument a posteriori, and by this argument alone, do we prove at once the existence of a deity and his similarity to human mind and intelligence. Now, I have read this so many times over, that's why I was able to read through it. Next time, I'll try to give you something easier to read that's not so thick. You could just read it on the first thing. So my apologies there.
You're fine. I started out strong. I just sort of lost my flow state there in the middle, and I could not recover it.
Oh, no, that's okay. But this is like worth reading twice or three times. He's basically saying we're seeing machines in biology that are better than anything we could make. And this was way before the time of Darwin. Darwin came up with his Origin of Species and said, I have a naturalistic explanation for why we have machines in biology. But then Darwin, he was wrong, and we'll show that on many reasons why. But of late, some evolutionary biologists are trying to argue that biological designs are terrible. Well, it's a little bit nuanced because there is sickness and death and all sorts of things that fall apart. But in the recent years, we are seeing exactly as Hume said, the machines in biology can do certain things far better than we can. And we'll go over into some examples of that.
And
go ahead.
One thing I want to add to that is I've noticed that every time someone goes to say, hey, this biological design is terrible. There's a few exceptions to this, and there's a little bit of nuance to this, but by and large, it's just them picking apart the fact that a physical design that has to work in a world with physics has a failure point of some kind. And it's like, you just basically just don't want the body to have to obey physics, I guess. Because anything you design that has to operate in a physical world governed by physics is going to have failure points.
Oh, absolutely. And this is a whole nother topic. And I presented in my talk at Evolution 2025. By the way, it's the #1 most viewed for 2025. A creationist gave this talk. And I said, look, there are problems, but actually the best engineering is, if you want to get the highest performance, you're at the edge of total breakdown. So if you want to, sadly, we see that where rockets and space shuttles just blow apart in the air. It's like, well, why don't you make them so they don't blow apart? It's like, well, if you want to get the absolute edge of a performance, and dragster designers who build drag racers, they know this, because frequently you'll see these things just blow up, on the race strip. It's like, why don't you make them so they don't blow up? Well, that's not the point. The goal is to bring this to the total edge of fragility so that it could just roar down that quarter mile in a very short time. And so anything that is at the edge of what is maximally possible in physics, it's going to be right at the edge of also total breakdown. And that's what we actually see in biology. And to that point, we do see biology totally optimized for physical performance, even at the cost of being just at the edge of total failure. So when a few things go wrong, it will blow apart. We call that death. The other thing is, many times what the biologists call bad design, they're not engineers. They actually don't know what a good design is. They don't know how to evaluate it. Or it's like taking the criteria for what would make a good train and then applying it to an airplane. It's like, guys, just get out of the argument. You don't know what you're talking about, I mean, a passenger car is not going to be built the same way that you would build a race car or a dragster. And so I see all these evolutionary biologists saying this is lousy design. It's like, well, no, it's not. You can definitely see that this is organized for a specific purpose and optimized for it. That means something that's optimized to be like a nautilus that goes into the deep sea is not going to be optimized to be an eagle that can fly as high as 20,000 feet. You can Google this. I actually asked, how high can an eagle fly? Because when I was flying, I was seeing these really big birds. And at first I thought I was going to be in a mid-air collision with another airplane. Then I realized that's a bird. What's it doing up here at this high altitude? Now, what happens, just for those who are skeptical, there are these thermal currents. They call them thermals, where you have this mass of air that's hot and it's rising, and the bird can just ride that all the way up to 20,000 feet, which is just amazing. So if you have any thoughts about that, then we'll go on to kind of the other slides I had.
That's exactly right, where they, one of their favorite things to accuse people of is, oh, you're out of your depth. You don't know what you're talking about here. And it's just like, you are out of your depth, Mr. Evolutionary Biologist. You do not know how to create a good design in terms of some sort of a physical, mechanical function, because it's not something you do every day. And then you go and launch the accusation that these are bad designs when people who would have to design it are actually trying to mimic biology because it's done it so well.
Yeah, see, and we'll see debates like this between Stuart Burgess, who happens to be a professor of biomechanics and robotics. He's a mechanical engineer, 40 years. And he even was a visiting professor, I think, at either Cambridge or Oxford. And he's in England right now. He's the editor of a peer-reviewed scientific journal in biomimicry and biomechanics. He has worked on spacecraft and also building bicycle parts so that the United Kingdom can win in the Olympics. So he knows a lot. He's won numerous awards for his work in building spacecraft. And there are these evolutionary propagandists like Nathan Lentz that say the body is so terribly designed. And Stuart Burgess said, just because people believe in biology, in evolution, sometimes they think they can opine about all other fields, And he said he took Nathan Lentz to task, because Nathan Lentz was saying the ankle is terribly designed and all these body parts. He said, look, I've won awards where a lot of my designs specifically resembled some things in biology that you say are badly designed. But the European Space Agency is using these designs and you don't recognize it. And I was like, yeah,
And you know what? I don't want to sit here and say that, like, oh, it's not your field. It's not your field, therefore you can't know anything about it. That's not true. You can definitely know stuff about it. That's just the accusation they always like to make, and it's fun to see it turned on its head when they're wrong about something like that.
Absolutely. So I'll give you another example. We're going a little off script from what I planned, but just let the conversation flow. One of my degrees is in electrical engineering, and I still consider myself as kind of an electrical engineer, not a professional one. Um, and one of the things I studied was um, because it was a graduate level information theory class. It was Shannon's noisy channel coding theorem. And I talked about this in evolution because a lot of evolutionary propagandists were saying, man, whoever designed DNA is an idiot because you have to have, repair mechanisms. So this isn't evidence of an intelligent designer who's wiser than us. And I wanted to say again, just because you believe in evolution doesn't give you a license to make stupid statements. I recognized the importance of DNA repair because I knew Shannon's noisy channel coding theorem. Claude Shannon was the founder of the modern internet. He invented the word bit. So when you hear about bits and bits make bytes, that was Claude Shannon. He was an MIT professor. And he came up with communication theory, which made the internet possible. In his famous paper on communication theory that really brought him on the map and which made the internet feasible was the notion of, how much information can we pump through wires? Based on what we know on physics and experiment, how much information, how fast can we, it really relates to how much information can you pump through these wires that would eventually make the internet, but also anything that's wireless communication. And so he had to concoct an idea of how do we even measure information, etc. And he realized the best way to transmit or store the most possible information is to actually allow errors to be stored. And then you correct them as you retrieve the data. And that might sound really counterintuitive, but when you're trying to compact all that data into one thing, you're going to get, the more data you pack, it's just like when you're writing and you write really, really tiny, it starts to be hard to read what you've actually written, but you can compact more information there. But he realizes, kind of by way of analogy, it's going to be hard to read. And sometimes in the process of trying to kind of write things in such a small space, you're going to create errors. And you're also going to create errors reading it. But his genius, he said, there exists an algorithm that you could create a filter that could reconstruct. It can figure out that you misspelled something based on the context and then correct it. So many times you could see someone misspelled a word, but it's like, oh, he really meant to say that. Well, kind of a very formal way of doing that in communication theory is creating these error correction algorithms like Bose-Einstein correction or Reed-Solomon error correction or Huffman codes or whatever. Reed-Solomon error correction makes your DVD discs possible. So when they're making all these movies, they put them on Blu-ray or your old CDs or your whatever optical drives. These discs, when the data is put on there, it has errors. And when it reads it, it has errors. But there's an error correction algorithm. So how does this relate to DNA? If the goal is to make the most compact representation of information, the best way to do it is to allow it to have errors and then fix them later. Hence, I could totally see that this is good design if the goal is compactness. And in fact, DNA is probably right now the best, the most compact information storage in all of the universe. It's very efficient in information storage. We still cannot exceed it. This is an example where evolutionary propagandists are saying this is badly designed. And yet the people that actually work in information theory and information storage, they're like, wow, this is kicking our rear ends. It's so good. If you have any comments there, Anthony.
One thing that immediately comes to mind on that is this kind of touches on a lot of fields, but you know how there's a lot of things that are assumed to be mutations from our evolutionary history. A lot of those may not be, because, you know, all we see is nucleotide bases. You can't tell if it's a mutation. You infer it is based off of, oh, it's in this lineage, but not this lineage and whatnot. There's a lot of stuff like that where it's like that may not actually be a genuine mutation. That might be an intentional area where a mistake is supposed to happen for the correction mechanism to come in and read it later and correct it, and therefore get more information out of it.
Yes. So we'll just move on. I'm sorry I had to go on a tirade, because this is the kind of garbage I have to deal with when I'm dealing with evolutionary propagandists. They look down at me and say, hey, Sal's a creationist, he can't know anything. And it's like, I know way more than you do in a lot of these fields. And I don't mind rubbing it in. You know, these guys are just so unqualified. And so this is why it's fun, because I get to rag on them for a change and say they're idiots. I know that's a mean thing to say, but I've come to the point, you know, like 95% of my critics are just in that category. It's like, you guys are idiots. You just think you know way more than you actually do. I know that's arrogant on my part, but hey, you know, that's what I think. And I think I can actually deliver on the goods there. So with that, let's look at this slide here. And so we're talking about machines. This is a watch or a clock. So have you heard of the Paley's watch argument? If you wanted to, here's your chance to say something on that.
Paley's watch argument. It's not the watchmaker argument.
Yes.
Okay, yeah. Okay. I got confused for a second. I'm like, is there some other auxiliary one? Yeah, no, I know about it. And I know about Dawkins' good old book, The Blind Watchmaker, in which he attempted to sort of use it as a thing to flip on its head. I don't know if we were going in that direction. I just figured I'd.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Okay. So I'll just elaborate. So there is, so there was a philosopher theologian named William Paley, who was, I don't know if his life overlapped that of David Hume, but Paley came after Hume, and then after Paley there was Darwin. So Paley said, well, look, if you see a watch that's lying on a mound or a heath, he called it a heath, and you started to look at it and just admire it, you'd say an intelligent designer had to make that watch. If you have a watch, you have to have a watchmaker. And he said, this is an argument that there's a God, because you look at biological systems and you have all these machines, just like Hume was saying. And so therefore there has to be a creator. So Hume, it's really surprising, Hume was able to reflect kind of the sentiments of the day, but a lot of this gets attributed to Paley, the watchmaker argument, but the essentials have been there like since the time of the Greeks and ancient Rome, because they were making similar sounding kind of arguments that there has to be a designer. So that's Paley's watch. So that's why I showed this picture of a watch with gears. Now, let me see. What do you think of that picture? That's a gear, but that's a gear inside of an insect. Any thoughts?
I pretty much just said what I was going to say. Like, yeah, that's obviously gear teeth meshing together. It's just happens to be in a biological organism. You couldn't have a more concise on the nose example if you wanted one.
Exactly. Now people can object to this and say natural selection could build that. I'm not going to even touch that argument, okay? Because I have better arguments. But kind of at an intuitive level, people start to see this, and I know because I hang out with biology students who had believed in evolution. I actually was in a biology class when I was going to grad school, and we were all giving our presentations on biology. And my professor was the dean of the school. And I just talked about, because I was an electrical engineer too, I talked about electric and magnetic means of navigation. And we'll talk a little bit about that later. And we were supposed to give presentations. We had a semester project where we would give a presentation at the end of the semester about any topic in biology, any topic. And so I gave mine. We are supposed to give 2 presentations. I gave mine, and one of the students chimed in. She said, "It's really kind of hard to believe this evolved." Right in front of the dean. And so, if you have any thoughts, I mean, this is why I'm actually thrilled. This is happening spontaneously.
Yeah, but a brave girl, honestly. You did say it was a girl, right? Brave
Yeah.
student. I don't know. Yeah, whoever they were, it was kind of ballsy to say that in front of the dean.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, another anecdote. I was taking a biochemistry class, and it was a large class. I mean, biochemistry 201 and 202. And the professor is diagramming all this up. He said, this is such an elegant, ingenious design. And he said, wait, I'm not supposed to say that. The whole class laughed as if everyone knew this is, you're not supposed to say that, but it's really hard to deny. If you have any thoughts, that had an impact on me personally too. If you had any thoughts.
Well, it just makes sense that like you'd have little. I don't know if it would technically fall into this, but I'm just going to call it a Freudian slip for now among people like that because, it would. Also, sorry about my birds. I hear them screaming too. It makes sense that the more you learn about the intricacies, the more you learn about the problems that would come with trying to make any of these systems work. And then when you see how those problems were solved, you're like, dang, that does not seem like that would happen by any kind of happenstance.
Yes, exactly. So that was Darwin's theory that we could overcome the odds through his theory of what he called natural selection. It's a misnomer. I prefer to call it, brain dead, unthinking, stupid Darwinian process. That's a better way. And that actually conveys that this doesn't solve the problem of improbability.
Produce more kids at any cost ism.
Yeah, that's another way of framing it. Produce more kids at any cost ism. And the reason that was a heartening moment in graduate school. So Dr. Sanford was paying out of his own pocket to send me through graduate school while I was working for him. And when I saw that reaction, I said, we've won the battle. People can just intuitively see this is designed. The challenge now is showing that neither random mutation coupled by itself cannot do it. Everyone knows that. And pretty much everyone except people like Michael Lynch. And that now, if we could just show that brain dead Darwinian processes, mindless, unthinking, blind, stupid, cannot circumvent the problem either. In fact, in some cases, it makes it worse. Then we've won the battle because people can totally see this if they're willing to see it. Those who want to be pathologically blind about it, it's like, okay, just wallow in your delusions. But the data tell us, one, this is designed. Engineers are totally seeing it. Biochemistry students, at least in that class, totally see this is amazing. And we know random mutations cannot do it. The hard part is, the challenging part now is showing that Darwinism can't do it. So I was very heartened. That's why I was just so glad to talk about that. If you have any thoughts, and then we'll move on.
Nothing of merit. I think moving on is a good thing to do now.
Okay. So that's in there. Okay. This obviously is a human-made. This is a human-made motor. And one thing I'll put out is you do have something called like stator. You have a thing called stator. So this is a human-made motor, and even though if you take it apart, you might think, oh, this is not that complicated. But if you want to make good motors, this is why they make you study physics. This is a famous ID proponent. He helped restore me to the Christian faith through his writings. I had the privilege of finally meeting him in 2022. Not too long thereafter, he went home to be with the Lord. As engineers, you have to study physics, and these are 5 pillars of physics. These are the equations that represent the 5 pillars of physics. You can do a lot of physics with just those 5 equations. It's amazing. Now, trying to decode what they mean is a nightmare, and that's, I studied these both in undergrad and graduate school. To make motors and radio waves, you have to use Maxwell's law of electrodynamics. And this is why I think I've got a chip on my shoulder. Evolutionists come to me and just think I'm stupid. I'm just like, dude, what have you studied by comparison? Have you studied electrodynamics? Have you studied relativity, quantum mechanics, statistical mechanics, and classical mechanics? I mean, have you built anything of engineering quality? They'll come to me and they just treat me like I'm stupid. And I just laughed. I said, you guys know nothing. You guys know nothing. I mean, and this is, there's been an ongoing battle between engineers, mechanically minded people like yourself, and evolutionary biologists. People that actually build and fix things tend to think the evolutionary biologists are just stupid. And then vice versa. They think we're stupid. And they'll say, well, you don't know anything about evolutionary biology. And just like, yeah, why would I waste time on stuff that's stupid? Now they think our approach is stupid because we don't know about Darwinism and that, so-called natural selection and some of the details of biology. But like people, there's always been a war between engineers who actually may believe in evolution, but they tend to be a lot more critical of what evolutionary biologists believe because they just have an intuitive sense of how difficult it is to make machines. And then for people that have to actually do this at an academic level, where they're trying to build motors and radios and all these communication devices, this stuff is hard. I mean, goodness. And then we see something in biology that does what we're trying to do, and it does it better. It's like, well, if you're an evolutionary biologist, you better be able to explain at our level if you're going to convince us your theory actually works. So if you have some thoughts, Anthony.
Yeah, I mean, like all of this right here, yeah, I consider myself a reasonably smart guy as far as layman's go, and pretty much all of this is stuff I've never directly had to touch just because it's so advanced, at least compared to me. And, I see that and I'm like, that would take me some doing. I'd really have to dig in the trenches to get into that. But if somebody sat down and said, hey, you want to just go make some nested hierarchies and build some phylogenetic trees with me, I could do that immediately. That takes no effort. Like I can do that right now. I could build you a phylogenetic tree right now with my extremely limited understanding of these things. Like everything over there, actually knowing how the stuff works, that's immensely harder. It takes an immense amount more understanding.
I know. This is why, I'm sorry to be so insulting, but it's like you evolutionary propagandists are total idiots. Your level of understanding science is so shallow. Just because you think you can get some gene sequences and pump it into an automated program, you can now get, and I've done this, all you have to do is go to the libraries, get all these gene sequences, and you don't even have to do the work half the time. Someone else has done the sequencing of how the protein or DNA is found in the cell, because now it's very cheap. You can take those sequences that you can get from an automated library and put it into a software piece. It's going to make your phylogenetic diagram for you. There's just like no work. And then you're going to publish on it, try to insert some fancy words that no one understands, and you actually look like you said something profound. I'm just like, this is so shallow. This is coloring book level science. And I know the evolutionists out there are hating on me for saying that. It's like, you guys know nothing. You posture yourself as being defending science. You can't even do first-rate level science that I'm seeing being done in biology now. That is, analysis of how things work, and then also engineering and bio. It's like, I'm sorry, I'm just getting on my soapbox. I get so mad at these guys. And unfortunately, we have dumb creationists out there who shouldn't be representing the creationist movement, and some of them are the more popular ones. And they do spew out stuff that makes the rest of the creationism look bad. And that's what the evolutionists will pounce on. They're actually glad that these guys are in the forefront of creationism, because they're, it's basically they can attack the caricature of what creationism is about, and it kind of makes me sad. If you had some comments, but you got it so right that even now you could just build your own phylogenies.
I mean, yeah, it's just I see what they do, and it's like they don't ever actively work out how anything came about in a mechanistic way. They just appeal to nested hierarchies of some form or fashion and say, essentially differential reproduction was able to make this. You ask them how, they're like, co-option, whatever. Like they just.
Exactly. They never explain it. And then when you start to get into the details, then it's like, oh, all they can do now is just insult you. And so they would do that. They say, you know nothing about biology. Have you taken courses in evolutionary biology? And so I'm like, I'm going to call your bluff someday. I said, well, I happen to study graduate level bioinformatics under someone who worked for the top evolutionary biologist on the planet. Does that count for something? Oh, by the way, I published in evolutionary biology. When was the last time you've done that? And so I can kind of call their bluff, now a little bit. I'm not going to waste my time publishing more on evolutionary biology. But it's like, all you could say is accuse me. But, people that are actually careful listeners, especially on our side, they'll know that the other side's just totally bluffing, and they're making stuff up, and they don't know what they're talking about as far as, the intricacies of, how to build machines and how they could even possibly evolve through Darwinism and, or neutral evolution or whatever. There's just no way.
Something you'll notice is there's a good deal of like dissenters. Like they may not be outright creationists, but people more critical of evolutionary biology and stuff like that in their own camp happen to be population geneticists. And it's like, because at least those people have to work on a mechanical level of, okay, there are rules to this, and this is how this works, and that's not going to happen given these rules and given how this works.
Spot on. And this happened only recently, and for 20 years I've been saying this, that Darwinian process, stupid, brain dead Darwinian processes should actually tend to destroy complex systems than create them. And people are saying, you don't know what you're talking about. So I said, look, it's very, very simple. The more complex something is, the more difficult it is to make a copy of it. It's that simple. What that means is sometimes there are going to be situations where you have kind of a nice environment where you don't need all that extra baggage, and you're going to dispose of it. So recently, it's actually, I think, a 2024 book by Michael Lynch, who doesn't really like Darwinism. He'll say it's a mechanism, but he said that's, there are other mechanisms, and he's wrong about that. But he criticizes Darwinism. He said natural selection is expected to favor simplicity over complexity. And when I discovered that, I'm like, I just won the Super Bowl. And when I started putting that on Reddit forums, people saying, you're quote mining. I'm like, yeah, that's your last defense. I'm right. That's all you could say. Doesn't matter about how I represented it. You got a problem now. You have to explain to the public what that means. So, I mean, it's been feeling like winning the Super Bowl. Of course, then you have to deal with everyday life, and it's kind of a downer, when your car breaks down and you have to change the CV axle. But, I've been on a high the last few months because everything's coming together. If you have any comments, and then I'll share some pictures here.
I had something and I just lost it. I literally clicked to unmute my mic and now I lost it. Oh man, what was it? If I think of it again, I'll chime in. I had something that's gone.
Okay. Hopefully, Lord willing, you'll find it again. So I'm just showing this gear system again, and showed a motor, and then the difficulty of how to build a really good motor. Now take a look at that picture. What do you think? You recognize this, obviously. Many of the viewers know what we're looking at. So what is this? What does this, doesn't that remind you of something? It does remind me of what I just saw with the transmission, the gears and all. This happens. Why don't you tell the audience what we're looking at?
I believe we're looking at the flagellum motor that we find on various bacteria.
Yes, this is an actual electron microscopy photograph. This is not a artist's conception of the bacterial flagellum. I mean, you look at that and you see okay, you do see, I do think these are transmission. Somewhere here it's not exactly a gear, but there's a reason you have these kind of like teeth like you would in a gear. So what does this remind me of? It reminds me of that. You see the teeth, right? And then when you do look at some motors don't have teeth. But it's hard to look at that and say, okay, that's not exactly like a human motor or gears, but it's like, it just kind of looks designed. So
it's 100% got a top-down purpose built onto it. That is the main thing. Like, you make a motor and you know what you need the motor to do, and so from the outset you assemble those pieces to do that. And this definitely mirrors that to a strong degree.
Yes, I was showing this at one college meeting, and there was an atheist reporter and writer named Lauren Sandler there. And she was watching the students' reactions, and she wrote a negative article about me in the book Righteous by Lauren Sandler. I've read it on my channel once. It was actually kind of hilarious. And she said, yeah, what Sal's doing is showing them wow. I'm just like, so you're seeing all this and you're just going to diss it. You're seeing the wow and you're deliberately not being wowed. But she saw the students' reaction. They're like, wow. They're engineering students. I said, look, this is the engineering students were like, wow, that looks designed. And so I'll show this diagram here. This is a conceptual diagram of the flagellum components. And you could see this is like not trivial. And let me see if you see it. So let's see if we have it here. I don't think it actually labels it. There is something called a stator. A stator. I don't know if they have that listed here.
We don't have to go down a whole rabbit hole about it, but do these function on like a proton gradient like ATP synthase does, or is it something different?
Well, I have something that will go into that in a couple slides.
All right, we'll just wait till then.
So just for those who are engineers out there, the typical electric motor uses electric fields. Magnetic fields, and you have electric currents going through the wires here. So Michael Faraday, he was a creationist, built the first motor. So there you go. You can do great science. Okay, I just have to can I get on a soapbox again? They're saying science will be held back by creationism. I'm just like, look, dude, the guy, Michael Faraday, he invented the first generator and the first motor. The reason we have huge amounts of electricity and we have the modern world is he figured out how to convert mechanical power, like say an engine, the engine's torque, or building a hydroelectric power plant or a windmill. You can convert that mechanical power into electrical power. through a generator. So you wouldn't have the modern levels of electricity without a creationist in Michael Faraday. And he also built motors. So imagine a life without motors and life without electricity. That's what you would have. And so this whole shtick about saying, oh, you have to disbelieve God to be a good scientist, that's baloney. That's total baloney. And sorry, if you wanted to say something, I just had to get on my soapbox. So this whole thing is like, we're pro-science, that's why you got to believe false theories like Darwinism. That's terrible. If you had something to say, Anthony.
I've always, I'm astounded by how I continue to find out more and more people that did like these foundational and landmark inventions or scientific discoveries were turned out to be creationists. I actually didn't know Michael Faraday was one. That's just one of the people I never, got around to looking into on that sort of topic. But it just makes sense. It seems like the only thing that being a creationist does make you poor at is being an evolutionary biologist. Go figure.
Yeah. So,
and probably not even that, to be honest, because I'm a creationist, and to be honest, I feel like I could be a pretty good evolutionary biologist.
So to make motors and generators, it's the third of Maxwell's equations called Faraday's law of induction. And there it is, right there. This is what makes the modern world. I can, with full confidence, say we would not have the modern world if we didn't have this third equation of Maxwell's equations. Maxwell was also a creationist, by the way. What he did was he unified electricity and magnetism and tied it to light waves and optics and things. At the time, he didn't know about radio waves, but radio waves were made possible. So all of our remote devices, Maxwell, and it's called Maxwell's equations. And you could take Maxwell's equations. It's kind of painful. You can derive special relativity, which leads to general. But I mean, this is why I've got such a chip on my shoulder. And I'm sorry to keep just displaying the chip on my shoulder. But for 25 years, I've been called stupid and all sorts of names that I don't know anything. I'm just like, dude, I published in biology. I've been an engineer. I've studied physics. You guys know nothing. And you're criticizing me. I'm sorry. I just had, you could see all that. You see these athletes that got a chip on their shoulder. They've been ragged on, and when they have their chance to prove themselves, they'll take it. So yeah, Faraday, Maxwell, and like you said, all these great guys. And people say, well, they didn't need to believe in creationism on just, to do their stuff. It's like, well, look, it certainly didn't hinder them. So how can you say it's going to make you a bad physicist, engineer, biochemist?
Yeah, we didn't say it was integral into them discovering it, although it turns out to be the case a lot more than not, that actually it did help them discover it. But even granting them the idea, it's like, okay, that, let's say it didn't help them, it's just sort of independent of it. The claim you were making is that being a creationist would hold back your science. Clearly not. Clearly that is false.
Right. And someone said, well, what if you believe God made it? Aren't you just going to give up on science? And I'm like, no. I mean, when I study a great design, it's like, I think, and I know a genius put it together, I'm in more awe. I want to learn more. I want to learn more. If an idiot built something, I'm not that interested. But if I believe the guy's a genius, I think I want to study what he does. I mean, there are people that will study physics just because it's just beautiful, or they'll study the works of a mathematician or whatever. And it's like, because they used to say this will be a science killer, because then, if you just think God did it, you're not going to be interested in, like, no, if God did it, then I want to study it even more. I want to study it even more. And I've not been disappointed with what I've learned. I'm just, it's just kind of like when I was showing that picture of the flagellum, the engineers were just like applauding. It's like, when you hear a performer perform well on stage, you go, bravo. And so when they saw this thing here, they're like, wow.
I don't actually think I've seen that you said it was electron microscopy?
Yeah,
image?
What did they call it? Electron microscopy. You have to actually use electrons to create the image.
Yeah, I don't think I've actually seen that of the flagellum motor before. So that one in particular is new to me. It's striking how much it actually looks like the artist renders, to be honest.
Yeah, that's the thing. This was shocking, and you can look at that. So you see that, and you're like, that does kind of, yeah, it looks like something you would see in a human mechanical design, but this is at the nanoscale. So now you asked about the performance of this and the mechanism. Now, I actually am not an expert on the flagellum. Okay, I hardly ever studied it, even though it's an icon of intelligent design. It's actually hard to defend that. You can do it, but it's hard to argue that Darwinism cannot make this. They're better. I think we can make decent arguments, but not killer. We'll give you the killer argument for topoisomerases, but this is the specs. So the rotational speed of a bacterial flagellum varies significantly depending on the species and type of ions used to fuel its motor. So the common range, most bacteria, such as, I call it E. coli, I can't pronounce that word. Okay, we just call it E. coli. Typically spin their flagella at speeds between 6,000 to 18,000 RPM. By the way, when I drive, my tachometer often, the ideal speed for my engine is at about 2,500 RPM. So there are, as you were asking, proton-driven motors. Motors powered by a proton gradient, an H plus ion, generally operate in the range of 15,000 to 18,000 RPM. So like you said, with the ATP synthase, yeah, proton gradients, you do also with the flagellum, for certain flagellum. We also have sodium-driven motors. Bacteria like marine Vibrio species use sodium ions and can reach much higher speeds, often cited at 100,000 RPM or more. Do you have any thoughts? Or
The only thing I'm thinking is more of a question, but since it's not really your specialty, I'll go ahead and ask it. But if it's not something you know off the top of your head, then we won't bother with it. Why do the different ions produce different RPMs? Is it like due to just different charge strengths within the gradients or something?
I really don't know. This one actually surprises me. I would think the smaller thing could give you higher RPM. So that's a good question, why it can generate it. But as an engineer, you would know that, okay, this just occurred to me. Okay, this is off the top of my head. I never rehearsed this part, what I'm about to say. I could be totally wrong. But I think, just like in cars, you can't just switch going from gasoline to diesel or vice versa. You would have to do some major redesigns. Now, we have made cars that have these all fuel things, but man, you've got to put a ton of machinery to be able to adjust to the different fuels. So if you want to throw alcohol in there or diesel, or I don't know, they're these almost all fuel type cars. I think that's interesting. I wouldn't buy one, but it just occurred to me, and I didn't really know this until like a few hours ago, that there are different varieties of flagella. One that could run protons, the other sodium. I'm like, wow. So, and they talk about co-option, and it's like, look, it's not trivial to go from, protons to sodium ions. So, I'm really sorry to say I don't have an answer to your question. I am surprised that it's so much faster. So we'll go on unless you have any other comment.
I was just going to say that, like, my intuition says that maybe the charge on the sodium ions is stronger, and therefore the flow is stronger, or something like that. I could be completely wrong on that too, because it denoted the positive charges on them, and that's how the gradient works, because it wants to flow from it wants to flow from the higher charge state to the lower charge state, basically. And that,
Okay.
I'm not saying that in a good way. It's easier if we had an illustration, but I know we don't have one.
Yeah, and we don't have to go down there. We've made the essential points. If you can see this, why don't you read it for the audience? hopefully this is easier than the one I gave you for Hume.
It should be. If I fumble reading this, I'm just going to. Oh, this says comparative speed benchmarks. To put these speeds in perspective, Formula One engine is roughly 15,000 RPM and it's exceeded by many bacteria. A jet engine, commercial jet turbines, typically operate around 10,000 to 15,000 RPM. And then directional switching, despite these high speeds, the motor can stop and reverse direction in roughly 1/4 of a turn or a few milliseconds. I think your mic is still muted.
Sorry that I had my mic off. To switch directions in roughly 1/4 of a turn. So I have an anecdote that's secondhand. Some guy, back in the day, like in the, in 1980, I heard some guy just laughing. They were talking about cars. Guys like to talk about cars. I actually never did. I like talking about airplanes. So it wasn't like I didn't like mechanical things, but I thought airplanes were just so much cooler. That's just the way I was. Guys love their cars, except for guys like me. Although I did like the Prius. Oh my goodness. What an architecture. Anyway, so he was talking about, one guy was about to throw away his car, but he wanted to do one fun thing. And he had a manual transmission. So he took the thing up to like 60 miles an hour, had it going, in manual transmission, stepped on the clutch and put it in reverse and then engaged the clutch, just let go. And of course, the transmission went, he said he just wanted to see what would happen. Obviously,
yeah, I'm sure it stripped the teeth off of all the clutch gear and the reverse gear it engaged with. I'm sure those went bald or shattered.
Okay, now I'm sorry to admit this. I was playing around. Sometimes when you're bored, like a typical guy, you do stupid stuff. I actually was messing with my automatic transmission and I accidentally got it into reverse at high speed. I didn't blow the transmission. Apparently the hydromatic transmission will allow the gear to slip. You definitely know that when you're trying to climb up it too steep of a hill and you just hear the engine roaring, but you're not really moving forward. So you car guys out there could explain why I didn't lose my entire transmission. I didn't. Of course, I had to put it in neutral and then drive immediately. There have been times when I was driving my Prius, there's a button there that's really near when you want to turn on your air. It feels just like that, but it's your parking gear. I pressed the parking gear at like 60 miles an hour. And I don't know how the Prius caught it and said, put me in neutral immediately. Didn't blow the transmission. Why did I point that out? Look at this. It can go 100,000 RPM in one direction. In a quarter of a turn, it can go the other direction. And it doesn't blow anything. It's like, wow. So if you had anything to say, and you can even comment on the stupid stuff, that was just, I just thought I'd have to put that in.
I've almost made the same mistake going down my driveway. I used to have one of my first cars was a Volvo, and I accidentally put that thing in reverse. Luckily, I wasn't going high speeds, but I heard that it was not happy about it when I was doing it, and I didn't blow the transmission on it, thank God, because I switched it out really quick back into neutral and then in drive. But yeah, they what is it? In terms of the switching in a quarter of a second at such high speeds, that's phenomenal, and I'm sure that's enabled by the small scales because there's not going to be a lot of momentum carried by it. So that definitely plays a role. But even accounting for that, that's an asinine feat.
Yeah, that's incredible. And of course, the engineers and biochemists, even if they're on the evolution atheist side, they're like, that's still pretty good. You can't deny that. Again, going back to that, I was sitting in a boring biochemistry class and just kind of trying to remember things. And then I was just uplifted when the professor said, this is an incredible design. And then he said, I'm really not supposed to say that. The whole class laughed. It's like, yeah, we all know the truth. We can't deny our eyes. We're just not supposed to say it. And I think that's what was so funny. We all knew we're not supposed to say it, but it's so obvious. And that's what made us all laugh. That's why I was laughing. I said, yeah, I know I'm not supposed to say that, but we can't help but laugh because you have to admit it, and like you said, it was a Freudian slip. It's so
Yeah,
fun.
it's like, oh no, you had to call a spade a spade.
Yeah. Okay, so we're getting toward the close of the I was supposed to do this in only half an hour, but I think we're just having too much fun. So we're an hour and 15 minutes so far. So I have been invited to Discovery Institute events to speak at private meetings. And the reason they're private meetings is there's a lot of persecution still. I mean, that's obvious. In the political climate, it doesn't have to be just creation evolution. If you lean anything toward God or Christianity, you're persecuted. So a lot of these meetings, and this is also good news, I'm seeing, when I started the creation evolution controversy 45 years ago, there weren't that many. There wasn't even modern day intelligent design. We just had young earth creationists, and they were okay scientists. But 20 years later, so that was like in 1980, 20 years later, 25 years later, there was Richard Sternberg, who's an evolutionary biologist. And it's like he jumped ship. I'm like, wow, if an evolutionary biologist is jumping ship, this is saying something's wrong. And then I started to see more and more of these. Now, fast forward to the present day, I go to these meetings. I'm seeing so many very qualified academics. They're either retired, they're close to retirement. Then you have kind of in the middle of their career, and those beginning, and then the students. And so we have this now pipeline of qualified people, and that number is growing. We're seeing more and more young people who are graduating college in technical disciplines like cellular biology, biochemistry, getting their bachelor's degree, and then now those getting masters and now PhDs. And we're starting to flow through the pipeline. And it's just heartening to go to these private events and see so many of them. And the numbers are growing and the quality is growing. It's just incredible. And I'm just like, yeah, I'm going to be so out of my depth at some point because these guys are going to overtake me in their level of knowledge, because they're some of them are in the middle. They're hitting their stride in their career. It's exciting to see. So that's kind of a segue into, I'm going to cover some of the material that I presented at the Discovery Institute private events. Now, since it was mine, I'm certainly allowed to talk about my own work anywhere. I can't really talk about the other presentations that were made there unless they have made it public. So just putting people at ease. I had shared a lot at the Discovery Institute what I shared at the Evolution Conference. So none of this is secret. The only time that I ever really try to be secret about something is if I'm going to compromise someone's identity. That's, other than that, I'll talk about it, stuff that goes on. If you have any comment before I move forward.
No comment. Let's keep going.
Okay. So as many people know, I work for John Sanford. He had me co-mentored by Joe DeWeese. These are great scientists. So this, like I was talking about, this is the flow of people. Now, these people they're out in the open. They're out of the closet, but there are way more that are, closeted. There's another one there. These are people that are pretty much out in the closet. Andy McIntosh, he's an emeritus professor in heavy thermodynamics at a very prestigious university in England, in the United Kingdom. And he's also a visiting professor at Liberty University. We're working on stuff in thermodynamics, just letting you all know. I've worked in population genetics, have published in evolutionary biology, working with Bill Basner. Now, Alla Hosger He is a professor of mathematical statistics and population genetics, and he has won the nation's highest award in Sweden in mathematics based on his work in population genetics. And he was a co-author with me on a paper on evolutionary biology. So take that, my critics. What have you guys done lately by comparison? I'm sorry, just to rub it in. And so these were slides where I introduced myself at the Discovery Institute event. So we are talking about how certain designs exceed in biology what we do. So going back to when I shared, we both read from this about Hume. He said, the curious adapting of means to ends throughout all nature resembles exactly, though it much exceeds the productions of human contrivance, human design, thought, wisdom, and intelligence. Okay, so with kind of that in mind, we are trying to find alternatives to GPS. There are numerous reasons for that. What if the GPS satellites fail? That's bad for everyone. In military applications, they have now been able, people in warfare, they figured out how to jam the GPS radio signals. So they're trying to come up with alternatives to navigate. This is a quantum magnetic compass. It uses quantum mechanics to be able to sense the Earth's magnetic field. No. It uses quantum mechanics to sense acceleration. And with a lot of computation, you can actually, if you calibrate the position correctly, in theory, you could get this quantum magnetic compass. I'm sorry, I'm using the wrong word. This quantum accelerometer, this quantum compass, it is a quantum compass to replace GPS. Now, I think this would only be military grade applications because you can do GPS for cheap. This would be expensive. You see how big this is? They have to cool. The reason it's in this little chamber here is you have to feed it a lot of liquid helium and bring it to close to absolute zero to have all this phenomenon that you could build this quantum compass. It's a quantum accelerometric compass, accelerometer compass. Do you see how complex? This was part of a $1 billion initiative for quantum technology in the United Kingdom. So just think about what Hume said about how things in biology much exceed what human contrivances, human design, wisdom, and intelligence. We found, and we're still researching this, birds have a quantum compass in them. It's a quantum magnetic compass. And you could see here in the, let me see if I can make this just a tad bigger. In the prestigious scientific journal Nature, hang on, let me move this out of the way. This is the journal. It said quantum compass. And this compass is inside the bird's eye. It is so tiny. So you have the bird's eye, and the compass is molecular level size. I want you to see how big the human one is. And this doesn't even work quite so well. And we have one here in the bird, and it's really small, not to mention, okay, so we have here, he has to cool it to cryogenic temperatures, near absolute zero. So you need all these refrigerators to be able to make liquid helium, and you pump it in there. But the bird has a mechanism that enables it to operate at room temperatures. And we thought that was impossible. We don't know how it's able to do that. You would need a world-class physicist times 1,000 to be able to build a quantum compass inside that size. And so what do you think?
I think that this is just the bats all over again. Sonar. That's a classified technology. How are bats using it?
Yeah.
Thermal compasses. This is a classified technology. How are birds using it? Like that little diagram there. You said we don't know how they do it yet. It looked like they're maybe they know a little bit on it. Is it able to see or perceive the electron spin?
Yes. So this is so wild. Okay, just for the aficionados out there, people who know physics, and I may be bound to get some of this wrong because this is really hard physics. I looked at some of the papers. I'm just like, look, I have a graduate degree in physics from Johns Hopkins, and I could not understand 90% of what was written. It's that far over my head. Okay, but they have this thing called the Pauli exclusion principle in chemistry, where electrons have spin up or down, and when it transitions from spin up or down, it creates a what they call a hyperfine transition. You can actually see it in the spectrum. And some of you guys, okay, I'm using a lot of words I don't completely understand. I mean, they're kind of disconnected dots. They can sense the orientation, whether the electron's spinning up or down. And when the bird moves around the Earth's magnetic field, it will cause these hyperfine transitions, which means it can detect the change in the spin orientation of the electron up or down. It somehow uses this, can detect the change in the spin, converts it to a signal, and says, oh, this is the magnetic field strength and the direction of the magnetic field. Now, that's hard enough to do that. But can you imagine the nervous system that has to keep recording this? Okay, so when I was a pilot, I'm still technically a pilot, but I haven't flown in a long time. My least favorite device to navigate was the magnetic compass. So back in the day, before we had radio navigation, see now the way we navigate today is we have GPS, which is a form of radio navigation. We really call it GPS, but it still uses radio frequency waves. We used to build all of these radio facilities where it would act like a beacon, and in bad weather you would just have your radios in your cockpit that would say, okay, there's a beacon there. You dial it to the frequency, and then you can kind of locate it. You could fly in bad weather, and then with a combination of other things, you'd be able to hopefully land your airplane even in bad weather. So that's called instrument flying. But even when you could have visual things, it was nice to have these radio beacons, because in the night, even on a clear sky, if the moon is dark and you can't really see you can't see landmarks, it's really nice to have that. My least favorite device was a magnetic compass. What do you have to do to get a magnetic compass to work? Well, you kind of know it's north or south. That's all it kind of tells you, and then plus the heading or whatever. But that doesn't help you if you're in the middle of the ocean. What you have to do is you use your magnetic compass to say, okay, I have my airspeed, I have my estimated ground speed, and if I've been flying on this heading this long, and you have your stopwatch, you'll say, okay, I'm probably in this position. And you better hope you're not wobbling around, if you know what I mean. Or if you have a wind hitting you at the side, and then now you're kind of crooked, and your real heading isn't your real heading. Okay, that's the worst thing. Then on top of that, you have to have really good maps, so you can estimate. Somehow the bird is able to navigate from Alaska down to Australia, flies 230 hours nonstop through all sorts of weather. He only weighs 10 ounces. 10 ounces. Many of our military drones will only operate for like 70 hours. This guy, some of them only 1 hour, but this guy can do it for 230 hours straight and fly even farther than any of our military drones. And he only weighs 10 ounces. And he's navigating. Where does he get the maps to figure this out? I mean, I get directionally challenged easily. And that's why it's kind of nice to have GPS. How does this guy fly point to point? I mean, the amount of circuitry that has to be wired into his head to accomplish this task. Anyone who's been in aviation, when I share this with aviators, people in the aviation industry, of course their jaws are going to drop. They know how hard it is to navigate. A lot of people died even before airplanes. They couldn't even navigate out in the sea. They would get lost. They had to build things like sextants and astrolabes, and they had these huge charts that, you know, you had to calibrate the position of the sun. And if you're navigating by stars, you have all these charts. You had to have very precise clocks to say, okay, if you get these angles when you're using your sextant or these instruments, you have to look at your clock, and then you have to look at these charts. You have to be aware of the time of day and the hour of the day, and then you could calibrate your position. It was nuts. How did these birds do this? It's technology beyond anything. So as an engineer in the aviation industry, when Hume said it much exceeds our human contrivances, it's like, yeah, if you're an engineer, you're humbled by these devices that we see in biology. If you had some thoughts.
Yeah, I just feel like I already have an appreciation for it. I just feel like I lack the scope since I'm not, you know, an engineer or in aviation or anything like that. I can really only imagine once you have to try to do these things yourself, how much more of a gravitas that it has. That so it's like, oh yeah, this bird's just able to kind of do it because it, you know, it can do it automatically. Basically, it doesn't really need to even think about it.
And so I remember the evolutionists were saying, why is this? It's called the Salem hypothesis. If you have a minute, maybe if you could say something, I'm going to grab the Salem hypothesis. It's really funny.
I don't know what the Salem hypothesis is.
Oh, okay.
I don't know if that's one I've run into.
So, all right. This is really funny. If you want, I just anyone can do this. They could put it in Google AI. We can read the Wikipedia article, but if this is big enough that you could read it, let me see if I can make this a little bigger. I'll make it just small. Can you read that? The Salem hypothesis?
I can read that, yeah. All right. The Salem hypothesis isn't a formal scientific theory, but a concept primarily discussed online and in intelligent design circles, suggesting engineers are more prone to creationism / intelligent design, ID, due to their understanding of complex systems, seeing biological complexity as evidence of design, contrasting with random evolution. Do you want me to read the rest of it, or do you want me to
go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
While there's no single Wikipedia article for it, related concepts include the Klopman-Salem equation, which is in chemistry, I guess, or Salem-Spencer sets, which is in math. It's got a link there. And the hypothesis posits that engineers' daily experience with design principles makes them skeptical of unguided Darwinian evolution. Okay, so I just learned that. All right, so am I reading these next?
Yeah, things? Yeah. I'd like. Yeah, I've actually never seen this AI one yet, okay. So I'd like to hear it.
All right. Observation: engineers by training deal with complex functional systems. Application: they see biological organisms as vastly complex, efficient systems that seem to require an intelligent designer, much like engineered products. Contrast with evolution: they find it difficult to reconcile this perceived design with the slow, random processes of natural selection and mutation described in evolutionary theory. Weak versus strong: some versions suggest that engineers are more likely to be creationists, weak, while others propose engineering education predisposes them to ID, strong. I don't know what they mean by that one.
Okay.
Why Salem? The name likely draws a parallel to the historical Salem witch trials, suggesting a form of societal bias or hysteria, but applied to a scientific belief, engineers versus evolution, rather than witchcraft.
That's really funny, and they did explain about those other things that are unrelated. Let me see, and I'll read the rest here. In essence, the Salem hypothesis is a sociological observation about a perceived mindset among engineers regarding biology and design, not a formal scientific or mathematical principle. But I hope some of the viewers here could see, look, I work with this stuff. That was
The
my
trend is so
profession.
strong it has a name. I didn't know it had a name.
Yeah. I'm like, this is why I got a chip on my shoulder. It's like you guys are criticizing stuff you don't even understand, but you'll give an explanation that evolved. You don't even know how it works, and yet you'll say it evolved. I think if you're doing your job as in defending evolution, you'd probably figure out how something is, one, what are even the parts, much less how it works. After you get the parts, look at how they connect. Then you would have some maybe credence in arguing this evolved. But if you have no idea what you're talking about, you're written off automatically. And if all you could do is do these coloring book phylogenetic diagrams, it's like, dude, you're so clueless. And I've got a big chip on my shoulder. You could tell how much resentment I have. It's like, people wonder, it's like, are you some sort of creation evangelist? No, I'm just the guy with a chip on my shoulder.
And you know what they'll do? They'll be like, oh, well, then why do so many biologists or so many, what have you, professionals that actually do have to understand how stuff works, believe in evolution? And it's just like, well, good question. Then you go ask those people. And it's like, why do you believe in evolution? Well, then they just defer to the evolutionary biologists. It's like, well, they say it evolved, and I'm sure they understand how it works or how they know how it evolved. And it's just like, no, they don't. They deferred me to you as if you would know. And right. You're deferring me to them.
Exactly. I have found that people a lot of times they're just like everyone else, just trying to make, get through the next day, make a living. So if you're a medical doctor, it's like, my job is to cure. If it evolves, it's like, okay, my job is to help this person get over their illness. How they had their organs that work the way they do, that's not immediately necessary. So it just gets kind of, as they say, the can gets kicked down the road. But as I said, just like in that biochemistry class, everyone kind of knew. It's like, it's kind of hard to deny the design. And what made us all laugh, it's like, we also know we're not supposed to say it looks designed. It's just kind of funny. Everyone kind of like, yeah, we don't want to hurt someone's feelings, but we know the truth. So I have just one more set of slides if you have a little bit more gas in the tank, because this is okay. So I mean, now this is a great chance to just share with everyone. And I tell you, talking about the chip on the shoulder, I presented this stuff in 13 minutes at an evolutionary talk, because that's all we were given, 13 minutes. And this is just insane. So I talked real fast. And then Dr. Dan and Zach Hancock just were ragging on everything I said. I'm just like, dude, I'm done with you guys. That was so rude, because it's Dr. Dan that encouraged me to present. And then he, rather than invite me on his channel and we could talk about it, he could at least disagree face to face, he just put on a 2-hour video just ragging on me. I'm just like, dude, you have no clue what you're talking about. One. Second, I'm right. And this is just really rude, because a lot of what you did is just misrepresent what I was saying. I was fed up. And I'm just like, look, I'm done with you guys. You ought to be trying to learn a little bit more biophysics, which is a field that I'm trying to work in. And obviously I have degrees in that. It's like, you totally dismiss this because you don't like the fact I'm a creationist and some of this stuff is obviously ID friendly. Someone cannot look at that quantum magnetic compass and not start to think, yeah, this is an ID friendly discovery. I don't think it would really help evolution to be talking about quantum magnetic compasses. And we could just keep going down the line of, you can't really just look at all the motors in biological systems and say, well, that really helps evolutionary theory. You can't do that with quantum magnetic compasses. Now I'm going to show you just one more that's also in my field, or DNA repair mechanisms in information theory. It's like, that's not going to help Darwinian evolution. And you keep going through all the biological systems and all their complex systems. It's like, what do you have that really helps evolutionary theory except the similarity of design? But other than that, you don't have anything going for you. So I'm sorry. This is kind of my cathartic moment. This is people just like, why do you do this, Al? I think it's good therapy for me.
And I'm sorry I'm not as expressive as you might want me to be here. I'm just trying to not, this is your channel, so I try to make sure that you're getting all the points and speaking across that needs to get across.
So thank you. So this is my therapy session, just to kind of let it all out and say, normally I'm a nice guy, but I've just got so much of an axe to grind now because these guys have been egging me on, and I'm just fed up with it.
I've watched his exchanges with you, and I've watched some of his stuff, and I think Dr. Dan started off pretty okay. In the early years of his engagement in the creation evolution debate, but it seems like he's gotten a lot more uncharitable and combative when it comes to any of the topics, because he's kind of got a lot to lose when it comes to it. And I think he just doesn't cope with that well when good points are brought up against him. So he gets he stops being so diplomatic.
Exactly. I feel for him. I don't have a lot of, he's actually, believe it or not, when I talk among ID circles, they have respect for him. They said he has the guts to be a public face for evolutionary biology when all the rest of the guys are hiding. He's at least throwing himself out there. And we all feel like he's fighting an impossible battle, but he's at least out there. He's willing to, put himself out there. The other guys are, we view them as kind of cowardly by comparison. So he's actually respected. I respect him, and I feel sad for him. I sometimes, of late, I've gotten irritated because he's pushing back, and I'm like, well, what would you expect? You're losing the battle. I think he was way more charitable when he thought he would totally run over me and the other ID proponents. He did not probably expect the level of fight that we would give. And then also now is getting the point, you're getting really good experts in their respective fields. In abiogenesis, which isn't evolutionary biology, but just the fact, it's close enough, if you know what I mean. James Tour is just running over.
Well, they go hand in hand. Like, let's grant evolutionary history and common descent all the way. Even if we get past that and we're like, yeah, that's true, but then you run into the wall of, well, life couldn't have started on its own. You're still in the boat that you need a designer. You're still in that theistic boat. It doesn't really help you.
Right. And then, he's seeing, it's like, okay, so Dr. Dan's an evolutionary biologist. And then recently you have Brett Weinstein, who's also an evolutionary biologist, a better known name. And he's saying, literally, quote, as close as I can, verbatim quote, modern Darwinism is broken. My colleagues are lying to themselves. I'm like, what do you do with that? My colleagues are lying to themselves. I'm like, I didn't say that. That's got to hurt. That's got to hurt. So, moving on, and this is kind of the last thing. And just, again, the reason I showed the Discovery Institute stuff, I presented, this is some of the stuff. If anyone was curious what I did, the Discovery Institute, this is also partly in the evolution biology thing, Evolutionary Biology Conference 2025. Go ahead.
This is the first I've seen of it. So like I've heard of the bird quantum magnetic compass thing before, but in terms of this diagram and anything technical on it, this is the first I've seen of it. I can't help but wonder if that's a lot like how the James Tour has described the chiral induced spin selectivity in cells before, and how that was pretty much necessary from step one. And it has to do with the racemization and things like that. You needed to be homochiral. Sorry if my camera's shaking. That's my dog.
No, that's all right. I can't speak well on that. This is really hard stuff. But the ability to control, okay, we're not just controlling molecules. We're controlling biology, controls atoms. And an electron is a subatomic particle. And now biology, we're seeing that biological systems are able to control a subatomic particle and even control its spin state. That's just nuts.
Well,
Chemists
it's
can
the biology integrated, like not just built upon the physics, it's firmly integrated and able to manipulate the very physics it's built into. Like, it exists within. And it's like, you're going to have a real hard time explaining how essentially a chance and then selection process like differential reproduction could do that.
Yes, yes. I was just thinking the only thing they have going for them as evolutionary biologists is the appearance of common descent. And I totally grant that because we have Michael Behe who nominally thinks of common descent. And then the fossil, we do have a progression of simple to complex, both in the fossil record and even with existing biological organisms. Like you said, even you could build a phylogenetic tree. So I'm going to say that's all they've got going for them right now.
And you know what? On the fossil record one, I think I've mentioned this to you in a comment before. There's something called ghost lineages, and that's something that throws a massive, and I mean a massive wrench in any sort of order you would want to build in the fossil record, because what it means is that you can't trust that the order that things show up is the order in which they actually existed. Even granting deep time, you just can't trust it.
We'll have to cover that more. See, I'm in my specialty. There's so much about young Earth creationism that I just haven't studied. And unfortunately, a lot of it is junk. But ghost lineages, I'm just like, I wish I had heard that. That does seem like a fruitful thing to look into. So thank you.
It's such an unsung thing. And like, when you bring it up to evolutionary biologists or paleontologists or anybody who believes in deep time and common descent, they'll be like, oh yeah, those are a thing, but they're rare. And it's like, well, it's kind of begging the question because we don't know if they're rare.
Exactly.
Because all of everything that is in the fossil record could all be subject to the same thing that causes a ghost lineage. It's just, you just didn't get two separated appearances of it. You only got the one. The same causes that caused that could have operated through the whole column.
Yes. Well, anyway, we're having too much fun. Otherwise, we're going to go all night at the rate we're going. But I'm going to try to get. So this is the quantum magnetic compass. I mean, guys, anyone who works in this field and then sees it in biology, you're like, oh my goodness, this is so better than what we have. And if we can just get them to see that Darwinism cannot possibly explain this in numerous ways, like with Lynch's axiom now, it's going to be easier, that natural selection would not favor complexity. So now let me take you. So we talked about subatomic particles. Biology can control subatomic particles like electrons and their spin. It can leverage it. It's amazing. And like you said, chiral induced spin selectivity, which means we selectively induce the spin of an electron. This is just incredible. We don't know how to do this really well. It happens very nicely in biology. One thing I wanted to mention about the quantum magnetic compass is physicists have calculated that if it is a quantum phenomenon that we think it is, they're able to hold it in a quantum state that our best chemists cannot duplicate in the lab, and that also it is at the edge of what is physically possible. Again, going back to what Hume said, this exceeds what we see in human contrivances. You see genius here, because our best chemists and physicists cannot put the system in these quantum states. It's just phenomenal. So there's tons of quantum mechanics we're finding out in biology. So we talked about subatomic particles. There's another class of particles we call quasi particles. Let me see if I have a picture of that. So there is this book by David Snoke, who actually had co-authored a paper with Michael Behe. He is obviously sympathetic to intelligent design. His book is in Cambridge University Press. It doesn't get much better than that. He wrote a graduate level textbook in solid state physics, and it goes into the topic of quasi particles. That's a whole nother can of worms This is another level of physics that people just don't even touch. So in addition to the standard particles of electrons, protons, and neutrons, we have a whole set of things we call quasi-particles. And there's a debate whether quasi-particles should be considered real particles too. That's a whole nother debate. It's mentioned in passing in Dr. Snoke's book. Dr. Snoke and I, he was on this channel before. It was great. We talked about more theological things than physics things, but his book is kind of the Bible of quasi-particles. I think his is one solid state physics textbooks that emphasize quasi-particles. And so this is so complicated, but lest people think I'm just making this up. One, it's a textbook thing, and this is, by the way, from his textbook. When I saw this, I'm reading through the textbook. I just about crawled. I wanted to cry. I said, this is the sort of problem I have to work with David Snoke. And I'm just saying, this is the thing I get. When they say that ID proponents are dumb, I'm just like, well, look at David Snoke. Can any of you evolutionary biologists deal with this level of quantum mechanics? This is quantum mechanics here. And this explains the quasi-particles. So, okay, I'll just read this from the book. The philosophy of quasi-particles forms the basis of an important debate in modern physics. The question of whether there exist fundamental particles that are the building blocks of the universe. Could all the particles we know be quasi-particle excitations of a deeper lying system? If so, the search for fundamental particles becomes much less interesting. For a summary of this debate, see Pines and Laughlin, 2000. And this is on page 88 of the Kindle edition. I can start to, and I'm sorry to introduce this, but I'm just trying to, for those who are like, their eyes are just like, man, what is Sal talking about? I'm trying to just say, look, I'm sorry, are we still here? The level of sophistication in biology now is already, we didn't have this level of physics before. And now we're seeing it in biology. We're seeing stuff that is exceeding even our best physics. It's way beyond the edge of our knowledge. We know it exists, but it's like we're seeing it now. And I'll talk a little bit, I'll try to explain quasi-particles a little bit. If you had some observations first while I try to bring it up what quasi-particles are.
First thing that comes to my mind is like, is it stemming from, is it a Greek or Latin word quasi, which just means, it basically just means sort of.
Yeah,
right?
sort of.
Yeah. And so we're talking about sort of particles.
Well, okay. I'll explain why they have sort of particles. So, we have particles like the electron that, as far as we know, don't have a half-life. We had some theories in physics that said, well, we definitely know neutrons have a half-life before it decays into a proton and some other things, and and then also for a proton, it may have a half-life, but we're not sure. Quasi-particles have very fast half-lives. Now, I'm going to bring this up on your transistors, by the way, rely on a quasi-particle. So this is a list of quasi-particles. You can look it up on Wikipedia. I mean, this is so exotic. Most people are like, Sal's spouting off his usual BS. In fact, recently, I was talking about quasi-particles, and this geologist said, Sal doesn't know what he's talking about. He's delving into physics. And he got mad when I said, well, look, dude, I have graduate level in physics. What do you got? You're in no place to say I don't know physics compared to you. And that guy was covert cuttlefish, and I'm just rubbing it in. It's like, I was talking with him.
Covert cuttlefish? Was that his username or something?
Yeah, covert cuttlefish.
Oh, okay.
He stalks my channel, so there you go, covert. You're out of your depth, dude. You don't know what you're talking about. Told you I had a chip on my shoulder. So you go to Wikipedia, you'll see a list of quasi-particles. So like when you're in, high school, they'll say, okay, this is the atom. It's made of a proton and an electron, and many times you have neutrons. That's the atom. Well, we're finding out in solid state physics, these other particles start to appear. They have charge, they have position and momentum, velocity. Sometimes it only exists in one direction, just really exotic stuff. So, I mean, you could see the list of all these particles, and the list keeps growing. I mean, this is just ridiculous. And I started to look up at what these particles that might exist in biology. There are a few of them. One of the interesting ones is, let's see if they have it, the electron hole. The electron hole makes your transistor work. So these are positively charged particles that flow inside your transistors. So you would not have modern day chips, transistors, if you didn't have electron holes. We found this out. And I had talked about this electron quasi-particle. You can change the mass of it, and it may solve some problems in young Earth creationism. That's for another day. One that is seen a lot in biology is the exciton. And basically, see, I'll open it in the new link. We don't have to go into the details of this. I just want you to know it exists. Trying to wrap your head on what it really is, you have to read David Stokes' book. But you have a positive hole here, and then you have a negative charge. When they move together as a pair, that creates a neutrally charged particle called an exciton. Now, I'm just going to show the relevance of this because, I'm sorry, hang on. Let me see if I could get, did I do this right? Hang on, let me reset. Anthony, did you have any thoughts if you're still there? Otherwise, I'll just carry on.
The electron hole, I was going to make some sort of donut hole joke there, and I just can't remember what it is. You know, you first had the donut, now you have the donut hole. Now you first had the electron, now you have the electron hole. Now, you said that might have something to do with some benefit to young Earth creationism later. I have some suspicions on that, but I won't even say them now. But why are there so many quasi-particles? It seems like they're just... Are we just finding essentially phenomena that happens when we do stuff to the elementary particles and then just sort of naming a quasi-particle after it?
Yes, and then also when we go through quantum mechanics, we are able to predict the existence of some of these, and then we test them out. So what had happened was, hang on, I'm queuing this up. What had happened was that sometimes we would predict the existence and then we'd find it later in the laboratory. Yeah. Most of the quasi-particles that I think, okay, so we kind of, like when we first stumbled on the transistor, okay, the transistor won the Nobel Prize, but we actually didn't know exactly why it worked. In fact, it was William Shockley who won the Nobel Prize for building the first transistor. So just imagine, if we didn't have transistors, we wouldn't have computer chips, because a computer chip uses bazillion transistors in what they call a VLSI chip. So this is a big deal. And he actually was trying to make something that worked, and it worked backward from what he predicted. But they gave him the Nobel Prize anyway, because they realized this is pretty important. So that is one case where we made the discovery after we discovered the quasi-particle after we found the phenomenon, if that helps. And then sometimes we've done the reverse. We went from quantum mechanics and, we would figure out if a certain quasi-particle has to exist. But now the computations are so difficult to actually do things from, I showed you that the laws of physics, to actually use the physical laws and calculate it. It's so hard now. Sometimes you do have, all you can do is stumble on it. So go ahead if you had any other comments or questions.
I was just going to say that I'll definitely have to just do some of my own research into quasi-particles and try to figure out what they are more. Honestly, I could, not that I'm any kind of super knowledgeable person on it, but I just need to revamp my whole understanding of quantum mechanics before. I've done my own little dives into research into it, and it's just been a while.
Oh yeah, quantum is hard.
Yeah,
it's because it's so counterintuitive. That's the thing, and it's just very abstract.
I was also going to say the fact that I look spooky now is because the lights have been turned off. I have a little lamp here. If you don't like how it looks in the video, I can shut my camera off.
Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. So just so they know that I'm not BSing people about quasi-particles, there have been at least there could be more, and I think there even possibly at least 4 Nobel Prizes shared among 11 researchers are related to quasi-particles. I mentioned Shockley, so he's the one who discovered the transistor. He actually shared it with other guys. So Shockley, 1956 Nobel Prize in Physics for research on semiconductors and discovery of the transistor effect. And so the transistor effect happens because of the electron hole quasi-particle. And it was later discovered to explain the transistor effect. There was another Nobel Prize awarded in physics. This is for superconductors. And then, oh, by the way, this guy's really cool. He won 2 Nobel Prizes because Bardeen here, this is the older Bardeen. Oops, hang on. So Bardeen in 1956, that's him. And then Bardeen here, 1972, so that's the same guy for superconductors. And quasi-particle physicists are, they're kind of considered the bad boys of physics. There's a reason for that. People kind of call it squalid state physics because we're just such rebels. It's just funny. There's a Nobel Prize in a fractional quantum Hall effect, and then another Nobel Prize for fractionally charged quasi-particles. Now I've got, this is so cool. If you have a comment, I'm going to bring up something else, and we're going to try to shut this thing down. It's just, I'm having too much fun. This is bad. I'm going to bring this up. This is going to be so cool. Go ahead.
I'm a little more curious as to what you mean by like they're the rebels of the physicists. Like, is it just that they just have to, their methods for discovering things are so outlandish and unorthodox?
Okay, so physicists always like to be able to compact things in a nice tidy equation. Like you saw those 5 equations, because it's kind of nice if you can have a grand theory for everything. And even if you can't, how about let's just have 5 equations that can describe physics. So for a long time, and you've probably heard about the aim for grand unification. It's just really nice to be able to summarize everything and then hopefully not have any conflicts between your equations. Unfortunately, there's kind of conflict between general relativity and quantum mechanics that we can't, it's like, we can find, they're domains where they would contradict each other or something like that. There are people that know this better than I probably stated this not so well.
And when you say they contradict each other, it's more like if you try to run the math on like the same facet of reality, but in the 2 different equations, they come up with different answers or something like that.
I don't know. There are people that are way above my pay grade that really understand that, and they're trying to resolve. If someone just Googles the time problem, they'll start to see the elements of it. I was told by a very senior physicist that the Wikipedia article is just terrible. But the Wikipedia article says, look, one of the quantum mechanics likes an absolute clock. General relativity doesn't like it. And he said that's not a good summary of it, but it's like, okay, I can kind of see that. You want an absolute clock. And general relativity doesn't want many views of general relativity don't have an absolute clock. Something like that. If I've totally misstated this, some guys you out there understand that more, but that is one of the outstanding problems. So back to your question, solid state physics is considered dirt physics. They're like it's kind of beneath them, you know. So you have musicians and like, okay, you have like the music that the population likes, and then the music that the musicians really like, and then beyond that you have the music that the scholars like. So it's kind of highbrow. Okay, so in the hierarchy, in the pecking order, they say, well, you know, the theoreticians and the grand unification guys, those are the very respected physicists. And that would be like Einstein, Schrodinger, you know, Heisenberg, grand theories. The dirt physicists are like, well, we just like measuring stuff and tinkering it. So the transistor is an example. You get a guy that's just getting a diode crystal and exposing it to all sorts of chemicals and seeing what happens. And even the guy didn't understand why it worked. He made a transistor and he predicted it was going to behave one way. It was the opposite. I think he was trying to build a bipolar junction transistor and ended up being a junction field effect transistor or whatever. But it was still an important effect. What a transistor does, for those who aren't familiar, you can amplify. So you can take a little signal and you just magnify the signal. And you can see why this is important, because when you're building a radio, you're getting a weak radio signal that becomes a very weak electrical signal, but you want to be able to amplify it so that it's strong enough that you could, you know, do whatever, like listen to it, put it on a loudspeaker or whatever. So the ability to amplify small signals was a big deal with the transistor. And that replaced, we used to use vacuum tubes to do amplification. So back to your question. So these guys were just doing stuff. It's like, we're not trying to find any grand theories. Okay, this is it. If you're a physicist, you want to come up with a grand theory of how things are put together and how they behave. That's just beautiful, because, you know, like E equals mc squared. That makes atomic bombs possible. That was Einstein. There's a way you can derive special relativity and come up with that energy mass relation. And it's like, this is the relationship that holds all over the universe. That energy equals mass times the speed of light squared. And that means mass all over the universe can be converted into energy, and that's why you have stars. That's a grand, that's kind of a grand theory. The solid state physicists didn't have grand theories. They had all these specialized theories, all these special cases. So it's like a zoo, a phenomenon, no overarching theme, all these disconnected facts. And that was considered kind of like, ooh, yuck. You know, we want a nice equation that we could write on a blackboard and use it all over the place. And you guys are just messing that all up. You have these systems of solids, particularly in solid state physics, where you get only that kind of particle and it has only these equations. And they're like, yuck. And so squalid means someone lacking moral character. So we're called squalid state physicists. I consider myself a squalid state physics guy. I don't want to call myself a physicist. So I'm in that category, but I'm less like, we don't take offense to it, because the world of semiconductors and computer chips, that's all solid state. That's all squalid state physics. And you're using tons of quasi-particles, particularly electron holes. But now, so you have light emitting diodes, it uses exciton quasi-particles, excitons. And that relates to biology and physics. So if you had some comment, I'm glad it seems you're enjoying kind of, from a curiosity standpoint with quasi-particles.
No, I get it now, and I can see why they would they would turn their nose up at it because it's just they're like, oh, you're not trying to figure out reality like us. You just care if it works or not. Oh.
Yeah. So, I mean, but these guys are, I mean, this is brilliant stuff. So, let me see. So, I've established this is a real field, but this is so advanced, hardly the average person doesn't even know these things exist. But
I definitely didn't. I
so,
mean, I might have known about little bits and bobs of it, but nothing like this.
so here's the okay. There are two kinds of excitons. One is called a one-year exciton. There's another one that's after the discoverer, Frankel excitons. But this is really cool. This is one. This is from David Snow's book. It said the Wannier exciton is therefore essentially an atom, completely analogous to a hydrogen or a positronium. A positronium is a regular electron interacting with a antiparticle, a positron. So you have a system of matter and antimatter interacting, and some of the mathematics either resemble a hydrogen atom or a positronium. This is just wild. So this is a Wannier exciton. And I think if I get the diagram, okay, so this is an exciton, and you can get this exciton, this thing inside the circle. I mean, this whole circle, that's an exciton. You can get, yeah, that exciton, you can have negative and positive in orbiting, and this can behave like a hydrogen atom. It's just wild. Okay, this is just crazy stuff. That's why it's so fun. And of course, traditional physicists, so why are you breaking our models, So, okay, so a Wannier exciton. I just want to say how amazing that is. And then, you study that in David Snow's book. So how is an exciton relevant to everyday life? Well, your LEDs take excitons, and excitons are converted into light. That's how an LED works. Now, I'm not getting into the mechanics of how it does that, but your LED basically takes an exciton and makes photons with it. So think you can convert the energy in an exciton into a photon. Does that semi make sense?
I mean, it makes sense in terms of a practical way. Like, I'm not obviously understanding any of the actual mechanics of how it does that.
Okay, so I'm not BSing you. You can look this up, how, excitons in LEDs. Anyone can Google that. Well, you can also think the reverse process where you take a photon and make excitons. So the LED makes photons. Okay, an LED takes excitons and uses them to make photons. So this raises the possibility you could do the reverse. You could take photons and use them to make excitons. And that's exactly, let me see, that's exactly what happens in photosynthesis. Photosynthesis, and I'm sorry I don't have a diagram, it takes a photon, it goes into the plant, and the plant turns the photons, uses the photons to make excitons. And the excitons then enable it to, that's how it's able to transmit the energy to other parts of the plants to make the plants do what they do. It's part of the photosynthetic process. When I was studying, I'd studied solid state physics at Johns Hopkins. And then when I went to the FAAS graduate school at the NIH, I was sitting in the biochemistry class, and they're showing photosynthesis. There was this diagram of the plant cell, and it said excitons. I said, what's advanced semiconductor physics doing in a plant? And so that's why I showed, let me see. That's why I showed this diagram here at the start. There's an entire field in biology photosynthetic excitons. And I'm just going to rub this in. Why the heck do you need evolutionary biologists to understand excitons? You need guys who understand physics and engineering to be working on biological systems. And, evolutionary biologists don't need it. And I'll tell you, a lot of research teams that are studying biological systems, I'll see that they're formed, the majority of them are biochemists, but you'll often recruit a physicist and engineer to help along the way. The last skill set that you need to help figure this out is evolutionary biologists. They all they could do is mostly phylogenetic trees, which don't add to our understanding of how these things work. So exciton study in biology is very important because we're trying to build solar cells, which basically take light and make excitons in many of the solar cells. And the thing is, biology is able to make exciton transport close to 100% efficient. We can't be anywhere near that right now in solar cells. So we're interested, again, what Hume said. We see the contrivances in biology far exceed what we have in humans. So they found out that these excitons, it's possible that the way that they work is they're able to act, and I could be getting this wrong, it creates what they call a Bose-Einstein condensate. So you have all these excitons and they congregate into a condensate. So if anyone's running an alcohol distillery, you're condensing the alcohol gas into a liquid. It's a condensate. The liquid is a condensate. Well, there's a special kind of condensate that has properties that they call a Bose-Einstein condensate. And we think that these quasi-particles, the plant is somehow able to condense them into like a superfluid liquid that we only get many times at near absolute zero, but somehow the plant is able to do this at room temperature. And they're saying, wow, what does this mean for technology? And it says, I'll just read the whole thing. The study published in PRX Energy on April 28th found links at the atomic level between photosynthesis and exciton condensates, a strange state of physics that allows energy to flow frictionlessly through material. The finding is scientifically intriguing and may suggest new ways to think about designing electronics. I mean, this is just, this is where I get excited. This is where it starts to be fun to study biology. So if you have any thoughts, and this is pretty much the end of our formal presentation.
The only thing I know about superfluids is like if you get, I think it was like either liquid hydrogen or one of the liquid helium or liquid hydrogen, one of those two, I might be wrong, but if you get it really cold, like really cold, it'll actually just seep through any container you put it in because it becomes what's called superfluid. Its molecules just slip right out between the molecule, or not molecules, atoms, slip right out between the atoms of whatever container you have it in.
I don't think, my understanding is, yes, you can contain it, but then it's going to climb. It'll seem to defy gravity, which is really funny. It'll climb out of your container. Someone can correct me on that.
I was just saying that's the only thing I've known about a superfluid up until that.
And it's also frictionless. So you know when you're driving the air, you can model air like a fluid. You put your hand out, you feel the friction, right? It's hitting your hand. So in a superfluid, you won't feel friction.
All the physics equations of assumed friction is negligible. It's finally
real. It's zero. I mean, this is okay. So I'm just going to, just so you know, I'm not BSing you guys. And for those guys who said, I don't know physics, I'm just like, yeah, right. Unless you're schooled in physics, you know not less than me, which is most evolutionary propagandists, by the way. And I don't even know that much physics. So you guys are really low on the pecking order. I'm sorry to rub it in. But no, I'm not sorry. I'm happy to rub it in. So if you look, I said the fifth state of matter, fifth state of matter. So there are four states that are there are three states that are known in high school. You have solid, liquid, and gas. When you get a little higher, you get plasma. The fifth state is the Bose-Einstein condensate. And I showed David Snode's book. He's a pioneer in Bose-Einstein condensates. He's a distinguished professor and an ID proponent. So this is what I'm saying is happening. You're seeing some really, really smart guys joining our camp. And you're going to see more. You're going to see more. Because how can you see that biology is doing all this stuff and not think this is really well designed? Because it's kicking our rear ends of how good it is compared to what we can build. But so I'll read the fifth state of matter. Anthony, why don't you do the honors here, and you can see if I can.
I can see it fine. If you wanted to make it a little bigger for the audience, that's okay. But I can see it perfectly fine right here.
Okay. Go ahead and read.
The fifth state of matter is the Bose-Einstein condensate, BEC, a supercold state where particles merge into a single quantum entity, acting as one wave predicted by Bose and Einstein and formed by cooling atoms to near absolute zero. This contrasts with solids, liquids, gases, and plasma, which is ionized gas, and exhibits unusual behaviors like superconductivity with fermionic, did I just say that right?
Go ahead, yes.
Fermionic condensates also existing as a sixth state.
And okay, so we do have a picture here of the four traditional states of matter, and then now we have fifth and sixth states. I didn't even know that there was a sixth state. But when they said in that article that it's formed by cooling atoms near absolute zero, if we're finding these excitons inside plants and they're forming Bose-Einstein condensates, that means this is being done at room temperature, which is going to blow everyone's mind. No physicist that's like, make a Bose-Einstein condensate at room temperature. You're going to say like, yeah, let me blow my brains out. I don't know how to do that. So this is a good way maybe to close. I'm going to close with what Hume said in light of all this. But if you have some thoughts, and then we'll close it up, I'll meet you backstage.
Not really. I think we've really gotten into everything that's so far above anything I've touched that there's not a whole lot I can say on it. So,
okay, guys, we'll close out with this quote from Hume. And again, it's amazing. He actually didn't believe this. What would you have to say now if you were alive? But he did not believe this. But to his credit, he did his best to try to articulate the view of the design argument by people in his day. And I think he actually did a better job than even most ID proponents. So I'll just read this because to me, this is beautiful. And it is a perfect way to end this session as we've looked at all the marvelous things in God's designs. So he said, look round the world, contemplate the whole in every part of it. You will find it to be nothing but one great machine, subdivided into an infinite number of lesser machines, which again admit of subdivisions to a degree beyond what human senses and faculties can trace and explain. All these various machines, and even their most minute parts, are adjusted to each other with an accuracy which ravishes into admiration all men who have ever contemplated them. The curious adapting of means to ends throughout all nature resembles exactly, though it much, much exceeds the productions of human contrivance, of human design, thought, wisdom, and intelligence. Since therefore the effects resemble each other, we are led to infer, by all the rules of analogy, that the causes also resemble, and that the author of nature is somewhat similar to the mind of man, though possessed of much larger faculties, proportioned to the grandeur of the work which he has executed. By this argument, a posteriori, And by this argument alone, do we prove at once the existence of a deity and his similarity to human mind and intelligence. So with that, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Anthony, for joining us. And God bless you. The grace of the Lord Jesus Christ be with you, and glory and honor to our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ, who is the intelligent designer and creator. God bless you all.